Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another thrilling episode of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports here on the Raw Prospect Podcast YouTube channel. It is Thursday, April 11th. The first day of the Masters is complete, although the first round is still yet to be completed. 10:40 p.m. I am live from Houston, Texas. My name is Michael Wein. Today we have a loaded show. We're going to be talking about Uconn winning back-to-back titles on the men's side. What does it mean? Are they the premier program right now in college basketball? And we'll look at a couple potential NBA draft picks from that game, Uconn-Purdue, in which Uconn pulled away and won their sixth national championship in program history. Next, we're going to talk about some big coaching news in the college basketball world. John Calipari, if you looked at the thumbnail of this episode, is now the head coach at Arkansas as Eric Musselman has departed for USC. Kentucky has now narrowed down their coaching search. We'll talk about that. They're targeting Mark Pope to be their next head coach, so we'll talk a little bit about that. I've got tons of thoughts on the last week of Texas spring football as we are gearing up for the orange-white spring game next Saturday afternoon to wrap up this spring portion of the football program for 2024 as Texas enters their first year in the SEC, including a scrimmage from last Saturday that we'll really focus in on. And then there's some portal news developing on the Texas men's basketball side in terms of who they are actually targeting, who they're going after, and who they're going to host visits for. So if we have time, we'll get into that. But before we do all that, make sure you guys like and subscribe. And now is the time that I welcome in my esteemed co-host from the Raw Prospect Podcast, frequent guest here on Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports, and big Longhorn fan himself, a busy man, Mr. Imy Nixon. What's up?
Well, it's been a long day, man. I'm ready to talk some Longhorn football, some college basketball. This is my kind of break for the day, and I've been looking forward to this. So let's just get into it.
Okay, let's do that. We'll start by going back in time to Monday night, where the Uconn Huskies and Dan Hurley complete what only two other programs in the last 35 years have done, Duke and Florida, as they win their back-to-back national championships, 2023 and 2024. Uconn has now won 6 national championships in the last 25 years. They're 6-0 in national title games, and as you can see, Dan Hurley himself is now one of 3 active coaches with multiple national championships on his resume. The other 2, as you can imagine, are Bill Self and Rick Pitino. So, initially, Imy, what were your takeaways from the Uconn-Purdue national title game? A game that was hyped up to be the 2 best teams in the country, which I still think was true, and a matchup of Titans down low and Donovan Clingan and Zach Edey. What were your big takeaways from that game?
Well, I think it proved what we knew about UConn, which is that they're a dominant team. They're a step above everyone else in the country, and they put any thought of Purdue hanging with them to rest, pretty much. Like they thoroughly dominated that game. It felt like offensively they just were getting whatever they wanted. Just the cutting, the passing, the movement offensively, like they play beautiful basketball. And there's no other way to put that. And then Purdue on the other side just felt like they were having to work so hard for everything, and eventually, and they were getting it done in the first half, to their credit. But I think that eventually caught up to them in the second half, and I think fatigue started to set in. I think especially for Zach Edey, and that was that. I think by far the better team won, like the better overall team won for sure. And I think if Purdue had any chance of winning, it was Zach Edey having to go for probably 50 was probably required for them to have any chance.
This run is one of the more dominant runs ever in college basketball the past 2 years. When you think about UConn running through this tournament and winning games by a combined 140 points, the 6 games they played in, that's the largest margin of victory for a champion in men's college basketball in the history of the sport. That's number one. And give credit to Purdue. They came out early. They established Zach Edey. And he was getting his. And we'll talk about Zach Edey more in particular here in a moment. But I thought UConn's game plan worked to perfection. And what was their game plan? As good as Donovan Clingan is as a defensive player, and I think he was by far the most impactful defensive singular player to their team in college basketball this year. And that was proven over the course of the season. And it's just crazy to think about he was the guy that was spelling Adama Sanogo a year ago on that team. And it could be argued that this team was better than last year's team. But anyways, like Clingan was playing good defense early on, and Edey was still getting his because I think Zach Edey is like a generational college basketball player. That's why he's up there with like 4 or 5 others that have won multiple Naismith College Basketball Player of the Year awards. I mean, he's up there with Jerry Lucas and Ralph Sampson, those kind of iconic guys. And you saw his dominance in this game. But I thought Donovan Clingan did enough. And by the time the second half hit, you could see as intense as Edey was playing early on in that game with blocks on the defensive side of the floor, fired up, ready to go, making shots, dominating down low in the post. It kind of wore on him. And he actually did his job. Like he was able to get Donovan Clingan in more foul trouble than we've seen the entire tournament. He was able to get Samson Johnson in some foul trouble in the minutes that Samson Johnson played, spelling Donovan Clingan. But at the end of the day, what did UConn do? They were bigger at the guard positions. They were more athletic at the guard positions. They put Stephon Castle. They switched him on to Lance Jones. They put him on Braden Smith for most of the game. They ran Purdue off the three-point line, and they made him take tough twos. And they were just bigger, more athletic, and better at creating on the offensive end. They run a beautiful offense, and they don't stop running that offense. Like no team was able to really take them out of their offense with that high screen and roll with Clingan, with Cam Spencer, or Tristan Newton, who was just incredible in that game. Like I thought in the second half, he was probably the best player on the floor. And he deserved to win most outstanding player, in my opinion. Because Clingan wasn't great offensively in this game. He had his moments. I thought Cam Spencer played really well. I mean, he was an X factor. I thought Caravan, although he was a little off from 3 in this tournament, hit some bigger shots and big moments. And I thought Steph Castle did an excellent job in this game, attacking early and showing what he can do on both ends of the floor, not just on the defensive end, showing why could be, a top 8 NBA draft pick, maybe even a top 5 pick. But at the end of the day, UConn said Edey probably will get 40, and he got close. But these other guys, although Braden Smith's fantastic, Fletcher Lawyer's really good, Lance Jones is really good, those other guys, they're not going to beat us. And they didn't. And that's why UConn won.
Yeah, they really needed more from Fletcher Lawyer and Jones. Like, it was very noticeable just how much they were taken out of the game. Because just from watching Purdue before the tournament, like, we know how good those guys are normally. Like, they normally give you, double digit points, giving you some assists. They're making an impact. You just didn't feel their imprints on this game at all, really.
So I want to ask you this, now that we've talked about the game. Is UConn the premier, meaning the best overall program in college basketball right now? Are they above Duke? Are they above Kentucky? Are they above all the other blue bloods? Are they in that tier one, at least for you, of programs in college basketball? And do you think that they can sustain this success with Dan Hurley moving forward? Maybe not winning national championships every year, but being a top 10, top 15 program and getting into the second weekend and making Final Fours. Can they continue that?
Yeah, to me, so to answer your question, yes, first of all, I think they are the premier program, or one of the premier programs. And right in this moment, they are 100%. But I think big picture wise, they're probably, top 5 amongst a group of, those two you mentioned, North Carolina, Duke, and then there's a few others you'd probably toss their name in the hat too. But I think in terms of, well, just to put it simply, there hasn't been a back-to-back champion since 2007, 2008 for a reason. Like, it's extremely difficult to have any type of sustained success to this level, to this extent, that UConn is at. And for them to have a dominant run like they did last year and then come back the next year and be better with losing a bunch of guys to the NBA draft is absurd, honestly. And it's a credit to Dan Hurley, and I think it's all about Dan Hurley, honestly. His offensive system, it just works, and I don't think that'll go away anytime soon. Whether or not they sustain it, it's just all is going to depend on, obviously recruiting is going to play a part, but I think it'll be more so with the transfer portal, continuing to add shooting to the roster, because the shooting that they had this year, to me, was a huge key to everything, because you couldn't help off of anyone on that floor, it felt like. And when they were getting going, running those pick and rolls, you were basically picking poison at that point with how good the shooting was on the floor. So can they sustain it? I think they'll consistently be in the second weekend for the next few years. I think so. But it's hard to really say.
The amazing thing about this, it took 5 years. 5 years for Dan Hurley to get out of the first round of the NCAA tournament at UConn. And back in 2020, there's a clip on social media that you can go find if you just type it in the search engine on X or Twitter, where Dan Hurley, after a game against Villanova back in 2020 or 2021, back when Villanova, was still in the national championship picture, and they could return there soon, but they've kind of had a couple rebuilding years. Anyways, he basically said, paraphrasing, but he basically said, you better get us now because it's coming. That's basically what he said. Very, very close. And he was right. Maybe people didn't expect this, but he knew, because I think the culture that he's established there, the player development that's happening there, and the way that they're recruiting, to where they're recruiting guys that fit fit the system that they want to run, the program that they want to have, the culture that they want to have. I know that sounds cliche, but it's actually happening and you see it. Like Donovan Clingan, good player, but he wasn't some like 5-star, highly recruited guy by a bunch of other blue bloods. Tristan Newton started his career in the mid-majors, and he was a transfer. So they're going into the portal. They're using that correctly, getting guys who fit their system. They're getting elite guard play. They've now kind of have this pipeline of bigs that they develop, and they run their offensive system. And I think with Dan, as long as Dan Hurley's there, which he's going to be there for a long time, doesn't seem like he's going anywhere anytime soon. Otherwise, he would have probably would have taken the Kentucky job.
Yeah.
Uconn will consistently be in the picture here in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and to your point of them going into the transfer portal, I think going into the transfer portal for veteran guard play, I think that's the future of college basketball, especially with how things are set up right now. I think getting veteran guard play is just essential, unless you have Jared McCain or someone who's a outlier.
Yeah,
you gotta have veteran guard play that like with decision making, with having some type of offensive flow, with just controlling the pace of a game, especially in a single elimination type format. It's just essential. I think the forwards and the centers you can recruit and develop throughout a season, throughout a course of a couple seasons, however long you have them. But for guard play, I think that's where the transfer portal is going to be really, really big.
I agree. I think that's the future of the sport. And some coaches are taking longer than others to adjust to it. UConn has the NIL funding to their basketball program that they need to compete on the highest level. They can go into the portal. Dan Hurley knows the players, the kinds of players that he wants. He knows the system that he wants to run. Those players know that Dan Hurley's not going anywhere anytime soon. They have that advantage over some of these other programs in that they have that stability on their coaching staff. And that's really valuable. They get guards, maybe not the most elite guards in the portal, but they get the ones that fit them the best. And so they're not going anywhere. And they're 6-0 in national championship games, which is super impressive. And they've now won, national championships with 3 different coaches. And there's really only, I think, 3 other schools that can say that they've won national championships with 3 different coaches. Kentucky, UNC, and Duke, I think, are the others. And so,
yeah, that's
you think about Jim Calhoun back in the 90s, early 2000s. You think about the title that Kevin Ollie got with UConn back in, I think it was 2014. And then you think about the past 2 years with Dan Hurley. And the Hurley family is fascinating to me. I know I'm kind of a college basketball nerd, but his brother Bobby Hurley is the coach at Arizona State. They run a pretty good program there, and he won national championships as a player at Duke. Back in the 90s, he was a part of, I think, the team that went back to back in the 90s for Duke. And then his dad, of course, their dad was a famous high school coach, and he's, well known and esteemed as a basketball coach. They're just like they might be the basketball royalty of like basketball coaching royalty right now in college basketball. Now that guys like Coach K and some of the other older, more well-known big name coaches have retired. Let's move on. since we're 20 minutes into the show and I want to keep things moving, we'll get to this fascinating conversation that I want to have about the Mount Rushmore of active college basketball coaches. But I don't want to shortchange us. We have the next couple months in the college basketball offseason to talk about that. It will be something that we'll do in the next couple weeks. Like, we're not going to push it all the way until June or something. But for now, let's move on. We'll get to the NBA draft stuff as well. But there's big news on the coaching front. I think it's a good transition to go from talking about Dan Hurley to now talking about the coaching carousel. We're going to center in on two specific hires tonight. I know there have been others. We've seen Dusty May, the Florida Atlantic coach, fill the void left by fill the void left at Michigan. He's hired there. I think that's a really good hire. We've seen, some other really nice hires around the country. We saw Louisville go out and get College of Charleston's coach, Pat Kelsey. I think that's a really good move to kind of reinvigorate that program that's been down for the last couple of years. But we have to talk about the biggest news right now in college basketball on the coaching front, and that is John Calipari, who spent 15 years at Kentucky and won a national championship back in 2012, took them to 4 Final Fours, but the relationship and everything had kind of soured here the last 5 years, has taken the open job at Arkansas, a void left by Eric Musselman, going to USC. So, John Calipari going to Arkansas. Your initial reaction is?
Shock. First of all, I mean, number one, I'm not saying it's a downgrade moving from Kentucky to Arkansas, because both schools have a lot of money to use on NIL and all that type of stuff, and he's getting a good budget to use for NIL stuff as well, like for each season. But I don't view Arkansas as like a basketball school in that way, and maybe that'll change soon enough. But I would have never seen this move coming, honestly. Like, it caught me really off guard.
I think the part that caught me off guard was initially Arkansas was after other candidates, right? They went after Chris Beard. They weren't able to reel him in, and he's showing some loyalty to Ole Miss. I think he's going to be there the next couple of years, because they had a pretty good season for his first year there, and they have the NIL resources that they need down there. And, he's staying there. They went after a couple other names, but they ultimately settled upon Calipari. And it was kind of, there was this silence for a day or two before, I think it was Friday night during the women's Final Four, that these rumors started to surface. And John Calipari ultimately on Saturday was reported to be the next head coach at Arkansas, replacing Eric Musselman, a team that just as recently as 2-3 years ago had gone to back-to-back Elite Eights. I ultimately think that it's not that often in college basketball, or even college football for that matter, that you get coaching moves that satisfy all parties. But I think this could be one of those moves. I think Calipari jumping from Lexington to Fayetteville might have somehow accomplished this win-win-win scenario. And here's kind of why I think that. First of all, it's important to acknowledge that, yes, the Arkansas job isn't quite on Kentucky's level, right? Kentucky's a program that has won 8 national championships. Adolph Rupp took them to a couple. He won a couple there. They've had other coaches to do it before. You think about Rick Pitino in 1996. You think about Tubby Smith in 1998. Coach Cal in 2012. Adolph Rupp, 1948, 1949, 1951, and 1958. And Joe Hall in 1978. 8 national championships. They have an illustrious history, all the resources that you could ever want in a basketball program. And it can be argued that they are the bluest of the blue bloods, even though they haven't had all that much success here recently in the NCAA tournament. They're Kentucky. There's a reason that, this job doesn't open very often. And as Rick Pitino put it, Kentucky is kind of like the Roman Empire of college basketball. Both the size and the passion. You think about Big Blue Nation. The fan base is super bought in, winning or losing. And so, yeah, Arkansas isn't necessarily Kentucky, but I think there's a misconception out there amongst kind of the more general college basketball fans that Arkansas is somehow, and I'm not saying you are saying this, but out there in the ether, there are people that, I think that Arkansas is some massive step down from Kentucky, and I just don't view it that way. I think I'd even go as far as to say that aside from Kentucky, Arkansas is probably second or third amongst SEC teams in the interest in the sport of basketball from their fan base. Eddie Sutton took Arkansas to a national championship back in the 1970s. Nolan Richardson won them a title back in 1994, and Eric Musselman took them to consecutive Elite Eights 2021, 2022, as I mentioned earlier. So this is a program that's done it before. They've won a national championship. They've had success in the tournament. They have the resources, as you mentioned, that Coach Cal is going to have access to. And I just think I think in the new era of college basketball, which is transfer portal, NIL, player movement, and not so much recruiting, although recruiting is still important in developing players for 3 or 4 years, I think Arkansas has a real chance to win with Coach Calipari. Now, there are questions, absolutely. Like, first of all, how many of Coach Cal's recruits for this upcoming season, the 2024 recruiting class, that he had signed at Kentucky, the number 2 overall class just behind Duke, how many are going to follow him to Arkansas? There have already been a couple that have asked out of their letter of intent. We'll see how many follow him to Kentucky. Is he going to continue his ways of having a high school laden, a more freshman laden roster? Or with the new life, the new program, and the fans' expectations, is he going to be more active in the transfer portal with the NIL pool that he's getting? And I think if he can find the right balance between those two things, John Calipari can have real success, and he can get back to being in the Final Four, at some point with Arkansas, because they've gotten close as recently as 2 years ago. They were this close. And I think, when you think about when Calipari took the job at Kentucky, he is the face of the sport right now. He's very well outspoken. People listen when he talks. Whether or not he's, having the success people think he should have on the court is a different story, but he's able to grab your attention. He's able to get the fans' attention. He's able to get people to buy in. There's a reason he's a great recruiter, right? So I think go to Arkansas. As he put it, there's not really a team there right now. He's going to have to build it from the ground up. So Arkansas fans may need to have a little bit of patience. They might not go win a national championship in year one. We'll see what the roster looks like. But can they compete in the SEC with Coach Cal? Yes, because Eric Musselman did it. And can they win at a very high level eventually with Coach Cal? And do I believe Coach Cal can get back to winning in the NCAA tournament? Yes. Is he going to have to adjust? Absolutely, at least a little bit. Because I think as great as Kentucky is, and it's like possibly the top job in college basketball, just from a resource and history and overall standpoint, being a blue blood, although it still holds its fair share of value, might not be what it once was. Like, I don't know if it's worth what it once was. Now that teams are built more towards NIL and the transfer portal. Everyone, as long as they're properly funded, can go out and buy players because it's legal. And if you have the funds to do it, to make your team better in the now, why not go ahead and do it? Because coaches are under so much pressure nowadays at these bigger programs to go win games, right or not. I mean, that's how it is nowadays. You're in a pressure cooker at these bigger schools to win and win big right away. The freshman stuff just doesn't work as well now because experience is winning. So that's my overall thoughts. I think it's a really good hire. It's really good. There's still kind of a wait and see of how successful this actually is going to be. But in terms of the job, it's a slight downgrade, but it's not far off. And I think given new change of scenery and a couple adjustments here and there, Coach Cal definitely has the ability to get Arkansas back on the national stage. Not that they haven't been, but he can make them a top 10, top 15 program in college basketball with the resources that they're going to give him. So that's that. We'll talk about it more throughout the offseason. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I mean, you hit on everything. I don't really have much, no.
Okay. Let me see if I have anything else. I think the expectation will be to get this program to the Final Four eventually. But I think Arkansas fans, if you're out there, have a little bit of patience year one. Nobody really goes to a new program and wins like right away. There are a few exceptions out there, but those are exceptions to the rule. And it's really hard to win nowadays in the NCAA tournament because even like these mid-majors can go out and they have access to the players in the portal too. So they can go out and kind of level the playing field a little bit to an extent that they weren't able to, say, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's why you see more of these upsets nowadays, early on in the tournament. Okay, so Kentucky, on the Kentucky side of things, we'll address this relatively quickly. They go out and they get Mark Pope. They asked Scott Drew. They had some serious conversations with Scott Drew. He was their top guy. I think he would have been an awesome fit at Kentucky. But ultimately, Scott Drew and his family decided that they don't want to uproot where they feel comfortable. They feel happy. And he's not under near as much pressure now at Baylor as he would be at Kentucky. They don't want to uproot that happiness, that comfortability, rightfully so. And he's staying at Baylor, a team that won the national championship, a program that won a national championship as recently as like 3 years ago. And they've been perennially like in the top 15 college basketball programs over the last 5-6 years. They go out and they they tinker with Dan Hurley, but it was obvious from the moment that Dan Hurley did his post-game press conference on Monday night that, Dan Hurley wasn't going anywhere. I don't know whether or not they talked to Billy Donovan. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know what other candidates they necessarily went after. I don't know if they maybe went after, say, a Bruce Pearl. But they ended up settling on Mark Pope, who is an alumni. That's the first important note of the University of Kentucky. He loves the school. He played at Kentucky from 1994 to 1996. He knows this program inside out. And for the last 4 to 5 years at BYU, he's taken BYU to a place that nobody thought they would be in. This year, in their first year in the Big 12, after some successful years in the West Coast Conference, BYU was picked to finish like 13th in the Big 12 this past year, and they ended up getting to the NCAA tournament. Now, he hasn't quite won an NCAA tournament game yet. He hasn't had the success some people kind of think he may have had or should have, at least from a Kentucky fan standpoint when this hire was announced. But he's only been there twice. And he really kind of hasn't been a head coach for all that long. At least probably not as long as Coach Cal. But I do think this hire is a good hire. Winning games at Kentucky is more important than winning the press conference. A lot of fans want the flashy hire, a big name that's going to win the press conference. The introductory press conference when the coach is introduced, that's going to fire up the fan base. I think Mark Pope can do that. He got BYU invested in their basketball program. And that's no shot at BYU, but, there's a difference here.
Yeah.
He's a winner. He knows how to coach. I think he'll take a good approach to this. He will utilize the portal. I think he can attract high-level recruits at Kentucky as Kentucky kind of recruits itself. Maybe not the classes that Coach Cal was stacking up year after year, but I think he can absolutely have success at Kentucky given those resources that he'll have and the track record of success he already has as a coach. Look, it's not Scott Drew. It's not one of these big-name hires, but he played at Kentucky. He knows the program. There's something to be said for that. And I think Kentucky fans should be satisfied with this hire, and I think they're going to need to they're going to need to have a little bit of patience. And if it doesn't work out, say in 3 years, nothing's really changed and it hasn't worked out, they're going to go hire someone else. But give it a chance, Kentucky fans. Give it a chance.
Yeah, I think I don't know much about him other than what he did this year. And from what I know from this year is that, his teams shoot a lot of threes. They like to spread you out. They kind of have a 5-out, or they had a 5-out offense this year. But the thing that I like is that he's not a coach that has a system and makes the roster conform to the system. He's a coach that conforms his system to the roster, which I think is a key distinction. I think that's the style of coaching that I would prefer if I was a player. And I think, I guess depending on what the system is different. But I think in most cases that style of coaching is much more successful.
If you look at where BYU and Kentucky finished on KenPom this past season, Kentucky was 7th offensively. We know how good their offense was at times. BYU, though, was 14th. It runs a good offensive system, as you just mentioned. They can have a good offense. Kentucky was 109th in defense. BYU, although they weren't great, they were 60th, and that's an improvement. I think Mark Pope on the defensive end of the floor can bring more intensity, more fire, get players to buy into what he preaches. And I think that's needed at Kentucky. As long as they get the necessary players that fit and they get that buy-in on both ends of the floor, I think Mark Pope can do a great job. But we need to move on. So we'll talk about the coaching carousel here throughout the next couple of weeks, and we'll get to pretty much all the big moves eventually. But this was urgent. These were the pressing moves that needed to be addressed right away. All right. You said you were excited for this, so let's go ahead and do it. We're now through, I believe it is 10 of 15 practices for Texas in the spring football portion of the program. And they will have the spring game next Saturday. So we are, I guess it's really 8 days away. And last Saturday, they had their first scrimmage, full padded scrimmage in practice. 11 on 11. They went at it, right? And I've got a bunch of intel and interesting notes coming from that scrimmage and kind of the practices over the last couple of days. So we're going to address that. I'm going to get Emmy's reaction to some of this. And this weekend and next week, we'll have 2 more episodes where we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the roster, the spring game, top 10 lists galore. We'll actually do a spring SEC 2024 top 10 teams list in our next episode. And then next week, we'll do probably our top 10 players on this football team currently. And then we'll reassess kind of come the fall. And we'll talk about players we're interested to watch. We'll talk some recruiting. But in the here and now, let's get into this. I guess is there something that interests you? Like, where do you want to start? Is there something that is on your mind that you want to ask me about before I just jump into?
Well, I'm interested to hear, I guess. Let's start with the quarterbacks. I'm interested to hear some news about the quarterbacks, I think.
Okay. What I know is from this scrimmage in particular from last Saturday, both quarterbacks had a very solid scrimmage. Sark is very pleased with the steps that Quinn Ewers has taken as a leader and on the football field as a quarterback so far in spring, which is good because there still is like another step he's got to take, right, to really elevate Texas to that last rung that they need to reach, which is national championship, right? And I think he can absolutely do that. But in this first scrimmage of spring practice, Ewers did miss on a deep ball, which is something that has happened in spring more often than Sark and this coaching staff would have liked. And he's still kind of working through that. Obviously, we know this has not been a strength of Quinn Ewers. In high school, it wasn't really a strength, although he has a great arm. He just doesn't really throw a great deep ball. And although he improved last year from his freshman season, it hasn't really hit yet.
Yeah.
But he kind of got called out for it. He kind of got yelled at by Sark. And he came back later on the scrimmage. And according to sources, he was able to throw a perfect strike for a touchdown. The recipient of that touchdown wasn't specified, but it sounds like to me Quinn Ewers has taken the necessary steps and has become a real leader in the locker room. But, anytime you're working with basically a completely new receiving core, it takes time, right? And typically in the spring portion of practice in these scrimmages, the defense is most of the time, not all the time, ahead of the offense because you've been practicing with your team now for the last 4 weeks pretty much, and the defense knows Texas's playbook. And so they're, the defense is, I think, a little bit ahead of the offense, and the offense will come. They still have more than 20 practices left until they actually step on the field to play a game. They'll have 15 more practices in the fall. But and Quinn will have time, in the summer to work out with his wide receivers and this and that. But overall, I think the overall reports from the quarterback position is that both Quinn and Arch have made significant strides. And that applies to Arch too. Like, I think Texas feels comfortable if Quinn were to go down again for a couple weeks. They feel very comfortable that Arch Manning can get them out of stadiums, that he's ready. So, yeah, I mean, that's really what I know at this particular moment in time. But
I guess
reaction to
the
that?
question that I think of is like, has there been any emphasis put on Quinn being able to extend plays more this upcoming season, or is that
Yeah, I think
not something that come up?
I think both Sark and Quinn himself have emphasized that as a
Good.
area where he needs to improve. And look, I can't really speak to the improvement that's been made there, but that's all the more inclination to watch the spring game.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Let's talk about some other prominent notes on the offensive side of the ball real fast. First of all, at the running back position, I'm told all of the running backs have had, at the very least, solid springs, right? The freshmen have impressed Christian Clark and Jarrett Gibson physically. I think they're more physically ready than even this coaching staff thought. They've pushed, they're starting to push the top guys in that depth chart, particularly, Trey Wisner, Jaden Blue. They're not elevating themselves above them yet, but they've made big impressions. But what I really wanted to mention here was that both Jaden Blue and Trey Wisner amongst this running back group were the most impressive in Saturday's scrimmage. Jaden Blue broke off a couple of long runs, caught some balls out of the backfield, was really impressive. He's had a massive spring. And, Trey Wisner, a guy from that 2023 recruiting class who got some more playing time and run at the end of last year, averaged over 6 yards per carry when he got in games, although they were later in games against maybe not the stiffest of defensive tests. He's solid. Like, he's a good player, and he gives them value on special teams as well. CJ Baxter, I think, still is the 1A in this running back room. He's had a solid spring, but ball security has kind of been an issue. He did fumble once in the spring game, and so he'll continue working on that. But I do think it will be CJ Baxter and Jaden Blue at this particular moment who, when the season starts, I expect to get the bulk of the work. And I think it could be closer to like a 50-50 split by that time, because it seems to me like Jaden Blue is really pushing him. Like, he's on his tail. And I think that's more of a 1A, 1B kind of situation than it is a CJ Baxter 1 and Jaden Blue 2, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. I think the fumble is the thing that I definitely wouldn't want to hear, but that's the thing that I thought of most out of that whole spiel. Like that's definitely the point of emphasis for sure to keep an eye on, because if he continues to have those fumble problems, I think we could end up seeing Wisner and maybe these freshmen start to creep in to his carries.
Yeah, I agree. The big note on offense, though, can you guess the wide receiver that's consistently been singled out by Sarkisian during the spring for his performance in practice and in the scrimmage? Just throw a wild guess out there.
Is it the freshman Wingo or not Wingo?
Yes, you're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
You're right. It's the freshman Ryan Wingo. He mentioned him last week. He mentioned him this week. He mentioned him after the scrimmage. And since Sark has been at Texas, he's been very kind of careful about singling out players for their performance, because I don't he's very careful about kind of alienating other players, especially around this time when the portal's about to open up again, and there will be attrition. I think there will be some players that will have to go. It's just kind of the life cycle of a college football roster. Yeah. Especially if Texas wants to add a couple more players in the portal, there's going to have to be some attrition to get down to that 85 limit scholarship number. But Ryan Wingo, from a physicality standpoint, from a speed standpoint, from a playmaking standpoint, has, in Sark's eyes, been the most impressive wide receiver to this point. He's been more impressive than Isaiah Bond. I think Isaiah Bond, although, he's really good and I expect him to be a starter, there's a reason Texas went out and got him. He's still kind of adjusting to the intricacies of Sark's offense. Mm-hmm. And Jonte Cook looked good in spring, but he's still working through some stuff. Ryan Wingo, though, Sark said he makes mistakes, but he makes them at full speed and then corrects them. And when you think about where Ryan Wingo has come from as like the most dominant, one of two like more dominant players in his state, in the state of Missouri, at the high school level, with his physicality, 6'1", 6'2", 210, 215, kind of the like in the mold of kind of like a DK Metcalf, AJ Brown type, with the speed and the strength and the athleticism, the ability to catch the football. Like, he's just a really good football player, and he's made some very impressive plays. I think he's pushed himself into at least the category of he's going to get more playing time, say, than Jonte Cook got a year ago, behind A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, and Jordan Whittington. And part of that was because, Texas had two potentially first-round picks at the wide receiver position that weren't going to come off the field last year. There were some unique circumstances last year. And I think, Jonte Cook could have played more and been a bigger factor right away if, say, A.D. Mitchell hadn't been there. But at the same time, I think Ryan Wingo has put himself in a position where he could get on the field and get into the 30, 40 catch range. And he's one of the guys I am really focused in on for the spring game. So when you think of the wide receiver position at Texas right now, think of Ryan Wingo. He's been the most impressive.
Okay. Noted. I mean, that's great news, because we've been talking about the wide receiver room for a while, just because of all the departures, obviously, 3 big departures. And if Wingo is able to fill some shoes as a freshman, then not only is that a great omen for, his career going into his sophomore and junior years, but also that's just huge. Just having that level of athleticism on the field. He's just a beast.
Yeah. Okay. Let's quickly move to the defense. Let's talk about Colin Simmons. In the scrimmage, he had 2 sacks and a fumble recovery. And he really kind of had his first, okay, that's why we got that guy moment in the scrimmage last Saturday. He's a special player. There's a reason Texas recruited him, obviously. And I think he's coming along. I think by the time, fall camp rolls around, he's going to be kind of on that Anthony Hill kind of track where they're going to bring him along maybe slowly to start the season, but by the time we get to mid-season, by the time we get to the end of the season, he could be like the freshman star of next year on this defense. He could become a star because guys of his caliber, guys of his recruiting profile in the state of Texas become NFL players at a higher clip than pretty much any other position. When you go back and look at the data, I think it's around 70% of guys of his profile become NFL draft picks. You think about Justin Madubuike, you think about Myles Garrett. I mean, you can go down the list. But Colin Simmons, to go along with Trey Moore, who's had a very impressive spring. Barron Sorrell, who I think is going to have a big year. He's impressing. Ethan Burke. Like they're going to be figuring out, I think, who's going to play and how much. Like how much each guy is going to play, what's going to be the rotation at the edge position, because I think there will be rotations on both sides. But all these guys are going to get theirs, and all of them are going to play. And it's going to make this Texas defense very dangerous from a pass rushing standpoint. So that's good news. Do you have any reaction to Colin Simmons or the pass rush?
Well, the pass rush last year it was good, but I think there's definitely a level like a extra level that you can reach for sure. Like there's definitely another level to unlock for sure, and I think this year we could really do that. And that'll also help the secondary as well. Like it's just moving to the SEC. You got to be good up front, and now I feel like we're there. It's from a pass rushing standpoint.
Yeah. Okay, and then lastly, at least for today, the one area of notable improvement so far in the spring is the play in the secondary. And I'm just going to read straight from the water fountain here. When this source, so I'll speak from this source, this article that I'm reading from here. Quote, when I asked who stood out the most among the defensive backs, I was told Gavin Holmes and Malik Muhammad at cornerback and Jalen Gilbo at the star position, which in Texas's defense is the nickel position.
Right.
It's no surprise Muhammad is having a great spring. I've been telling anyone who will listen that Muhammad is going to have a star-making season in 2024. But sources said Gavin Holmes, who spent his first 3 seasons in college football with Wake Forest and transferred to Texas before last season, came into spring on a mission and is pushing Terrence Brooks seriously at the field corner position.
Wow. Okay.
5'11", 180 pounds. He's not he doesn't have the size of most of the Texas cornerbacks, but he does have good length and he's really fast. And one of the issues with this Texas secondary the past couple of years has been foot speed. Like they just don't have enough athleticism and speed in their secondary. So it's interesting the Gavin Holmes Terrence Brooks battle that's kind of panning out here is something I'm going to be watching for in the spring game. Here's some data for you that you can kind of marinate on. According to Pro Football Focus, which isn't the Bible, I mean, to some people like it more than others, but Holmes, who played 319 snaps last season, was graded the highest cornerback for the Longhorns in 2023 with a grade of 78.6, just ahead of Malik Muhammad, 78.5, who played 479 snaps. So Muhammad played more snaps. They were both kind of on an equal level. They were both graded as a 78, a good player, plus player. But it's interesting because Brooks, was well ahead from a grade standpoint. Holmes was well ahead from a grading standpoint last year than Terrence Brooks was. Brooks graded out a 62.9, played 589 snaps and 13 starts at the field corner spot. However, Brooks obviously is a better run defender than Gavin Holmes is because he's bigger and a better tackler. And Brooks graded out as a better run defender than both Muhammad and Gavin Holmes. He also graded out as a higher tackler than Holmes and Muhammad. So there's this interesting dynamic developing there. I'll be interested to see what happens. Who do they start at field corner come the spring game? And how much time if it isn't Gavin Holmes that's starting, how much time and how much are they rotating those guys? Because the goal, and Sark has said this year, as they have a ton of talent in this secondary, is to get the 5 best players on the field. That's it. Get the best players on the field and let them play. A little bit more into the secondary before we kind of wrap this up. Look, they're 10 practices in. They're still kind of miles away from making many decisions, game day decisions about the 2 deep, the depth chart. But sources have been hearing that more and more good things about Jalen Gilbo at both the star nickel position and cornerback position. If you don't know much about Jalen Gilbo, he's from the 2022 recruiting class, pretty highly recruited, started 3 games as a true freshman, but then he got hurt and he missed the rest of the season due to a knee injury. But Sarkisian said last week after the spring game, he's had a tremendous spring. He is back, is kind of how I joked with him the other day. He's playing fast. He's physical. He's understanding of his angles better. And star is as difficult a position as any on our defense. And he's playing it very well. And that's it. The reason that's interesting is because the guy that's predominantly manned that position the past 2 years has been Jahdae Barron. And so, if Jalen Gilbo is a guy that's kind of ready to take over that position, that would give Texas even more versatility in the secondary because they'd be able to move Jahdae Barron to safety or corner. I'd probably say corner. And they would really be able to then probably get their 5 best players on the field. Because Sark said, quote, the goal is how do we get our 5 best defensive backs on the field? And they have versatility there, like Andrew Makuba, who's had a very good spring. He can play safety and the nickel. Gilbo can play nickel and corner. And then Barron can play nickel, corner, or safety. So it's like, man, oh man. And then you have Derek Williams, you have Michael Taff, you have Malik Muhammad, you have Gavin Holmes, you have Terrence Brooks, you have Jalen Gilbo, you have Jelani McDonald, you have Kobe Black, you have Warren Roberson. Like, the secondary room is deep. They're just figuring out right now who's going to play where, how do we get our 5 best players on the field. And I'm going to be watching it for sure come next Saturday in the spring game. Anything? Yeah, I know that was loaded with information, but
yeah, there's a lot there. Well, first thing is, it sounds like the depth is just in a much, much better spot, which is the first thing. Like, if one of these guys goes down, God forbid, knock on wood, But if that were to happen, it seems like we're in a pretty good spot, no matter the
Yeah.
case. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is just the secondary was so much of a weakness last year. It just kind of felt inevitable that it would, you know, I guess revert to the mean, I guess almost. Because historically, the secondary, like it hasn't been a great secondary, but for the most part, from the defense, like from the good defenses we've had, the secondary has been pretty solid. So I think this is more of a reverting back to the mean type of thing, and hopefully it can be more than that. Maybe it can be a good to elite unit.
Yeah. A couple other notes. There have been reports that sophomore Jelani McDonald from the 2023 class has moved into the top 4 at the safety position, along with Andrew Makuba, Derek Williams, and Michael Taff. It's also been reported that, Wardell Mack and Kobe Black are having very good springs. Both of those guys showed up in the scrimmage. So that's good news. Both of those freshmen from the from this past year's class, the 2024 recruiting class, are already making an impact. And then, we'll see what happens with the defensive line. We'll see what happens there. I'll be interested to watch, how that unfolds in the spring game in particular. I've heard good things about, Vernon Broughton and Alfred Collins throughout the spring, but obviously when the portal opens on Monday, it's going to be interesting to see if Texas, finds another guy or two, because I think they want another guy or two to feel good about their depth at that position. And look, if one of those Michigan guys, Kenneth Grant or Mason Graham, enters the portal, Texas will be all over them. And there's still rumors out there that Bear Alexander could still get into the portal. So maybe another guy enters. Who knows? So we'll see what happens, but that's a lot of the intel from the scrimmage and what's been happening in spring ball. Any other comments, questions?
No, not really. I think that's. I mean, that's everything.
Okay.
I guess
Uh,
maybe just any updates on the right tackle spot and just the freshman that we're gonna put there.
well, I think that's Cam Williams' job to lose right now. He's, he was very highly recruited. He's big dude. Really, I mean, he has a chance to be really good at that position. But Trevor Goosby's a guy who I think right now is the third tackle on the roster. Uh, Again, big frame, athletic, has really impressed and made a charge in the spring. I think he's more suited at left tackle behind Kelvin Banks. That's where they feel the most comfortable playing him. And that's opened up the door for Brandon Baker to potentially push Cam Williams. Look, nothing's really decided yet. I think the two starters that are absolutely locked in, I think there's 3 actually that are probably locked in on the offensive line. Jake Majors at center. He's locked into that position, and rightfully so. Kelvin Banks at left tackle, obviously. And then Devin Campbell, who stepped in at right guard last year and did an excellent job. A 5-star from, the 2022 class, that big offensive line class that they were able to bring in. So, but I think left guard is still an issue, or still something they're figuring out. Let's put it that way. Cole Hudson, some other guys are taking reps there. And then right tackle, although I think it's Cam Williams' job to lose. We'll see how it looks in the spring game. Like, we'll see how many reps Brandon Baker gets. We'll see, if anyone else gets reps over there. But right now, the name to watch is Cam Williams. So
Is the spring game going to be on TV? Because
I
I think it's.
I think it
I
should
want to
be.
watch it, but
I think it should be on ESPN Plus. I'll double check that, but it should be.
gotcha. Yeah, it'd be
Um,
nice to be able to record it and be able to watch it
yeah,
back a few times. But
yeah. I'm
yeah, we'll see.
sure if you're not able to watch it live, there will be. I'm sure it'll be on YouTube, or there will be ways you can find it to watch it if you can't get to it live. But we'll look into that. I want to talk about the portal stuff for basketball, but it is late. It's 11:50. We did start this pretty late, so we will. Texas is hosting some official visitors for this weekend in basketball. It could be a pretty big weekend from a portal standpoint for them. And there are a couple names that I could mention, but we'll save that. I'm pretty sure I'll be able to gather more intel, and we'll do that on our Saturday episode. So until then, hope you guys enjoy this. Make sure you guys like and subscribe and share this content if you really enjoy. If you have Longhorn fans and friends, please share it with them. A lot of information that I just threw at you, so it's going to take some time to kind of digest it. And we'll have minimum 2 more dit holes coming up for you before the spring game. One of them will be kind of more all over the place, and the other will be very focused in on football, Texas football, the spring game.
And it's probably maybe some NFL draft as well.
Yeah, well, that's this next episode. Like, we're going to have some NFL draft content. We're going to have those SEC power rankings that I was talking about, and maybe some baseball stuff. But then the next one, this next week, I don't know what day it's going to be yet, before the spring game, we'll be doing some stuff related to the spring game, getting more into the nitty-gritty of the roster and the players. And we're going to be talking recruiting because there's some really interesting stuff. I'm going to give Imy some stuff to marinate on until then, in the meantime, but we'll get to that. But until then, guys, hook 'em horns, and we'll see you on Saturday for our next episode of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. Enjoy the Masters and enjoy your weekend. Hook 'em. Peace.